Hello, my name is Jamin Kimmel, and I'm an urban planner and consultant working for the City of Missoula on the Our Missoula project. This video is part of a series of 4 videos that summarize an equity analysis that was conducted of Missoula's land use and zoning policies. This is the second video in the series. In this video, we will summarize how the city's current land use policies and regulations contribute to social equity issues. First, we'll explain how land use regulations impact housing costs and affordability. Then we will explain how this issue is the root cause of other equity issues of segregation and exclusion. So let's first start with housing affordability. Land use regulations impact housing affordability in 2 ways. It is important to understand these 2 separate processes to paint a complete picture of the inequities that can be caused by land use regulations. The first way that land use regulations impact housing affordability is by encouraging builders to build larger homes, and larger homes are almost always more expensive homes. So let's take a second to break this down. Consider an empty lot in a zone that allows 1 house per lot. The zoning rules say you can build only 1 home for every 10,000 square feet of land. There are no rules that dictate how big or small your 1 home can be. So you have the option to build a 3,000 square foot home or a 1,500 square foot home. And in this situation, it's almost always more profitable to build 1 larger home than 1 smaller home. Most builders will choose to build the larger, more expensive home. Now imagine that the zoning rules say you can build 3 homes on the same empty lot instead of just 1 home. However, it's not possible to fit 3 large homes. It's possible to fit 3 smaller homes. It will usually be more profitable to build 3 small homes than 1 large home. Yet each small home will sell for a lower price that's affordable to more households than the larger home. The number of homes allowed on a given area of land is also called density. And in general, as allowed density increases, the potential affordability of housing also increases. The second way that land use regulations impact housing affordability is by limiting the overall supply of housing. This impacts all types of housing in all neighborhoods across the city. Housing, like any other good or service, is subject to the laws of supply and demand. If demand for housing is high and the supply is scarce, then prices will rise. Missoula, like many cities in the U.S., has an acute shortage of housing. For example, the current rental vacancy rate is 2.6%, but a housing market with a healthy supply of homes would have a vacancy rate of 5 to 10%. There's a growing consensus in economic research that overly restrictive land use regulations play a major role in housing shortages in many cities, which leads to rising prices and rents. We analyzed the economics of building new housing in each zone district in Missoula to evaluate how the Missoula zoning regulations could be contributing to affordability issues. So these models show how zoning has a big influence in what kinds of housing are possible, which affects how large the homes are likely to be, and what sale price or rent would likely be needed for that housing to be economically viable to develop. This chart shows the minimum price per home that a builder must charge for a housing project to be economically viable to build. And this illustrates the role that land use regulations play in constraining housing affordability. So new homes in single dwelling zones in Missoula must be sold for between about $540,000 to $940,000 per unit to be economically viable to build. So these homes are really only affordable to approximately 10 to 15% of families in Missoula. Conversely, new homes in the multi-dwelling zones, which allow for a wider range of housing types at higher densities, could be sold for about $300,000 to $400,000 per unit and remain viable to build. These homes will be affordable to at least 30 to 40% of families in Missoula. There are 2 reasons that homes can be lower priced in the multi-dwelling zones. The homes are smaller, and also the cost of land can be spread across more units. So to best understand the overall impact of Missoula's zoning regulations on housing affordability, we need to step back and consider where those regulations apply and how they've evolved over time. So Missoula adopted its first zoning code in 1932. The original code was far simpler than today's code. There were only 4 zoning districts, and there were 2 types of residential zone districts. So one that allowed for single dwelling houses and duplexes, and one that allowed for all types of housing, labeled here as multi-dwelling, including apartments, but also single dwelling houses and other housing types. These zoning districts were expanded in 1948 as the city grew and continued to be used in other neighborhoods as they were developed. And however, a significant change occurred in the latter half of the 20th century, and that is that most new neighborhoods were zoned exclusively for single dwelling houses. And these are the areas shown in light yellow on this map. And further, many existing neighborhoods were also changed from allowing a wider variety of housing types, such as a multi-dwelling or a single dwelling and duplex zone district, to exclusively allowing only single dwelling houses. Today, about 44% of the land where housing is allowed is limited to single dwelling houses in Missoula. When we incorporate the affordability data related to each zone district that we presented previously, this underscores some of the equity issues that are associated with this zoning map. And that is that about 64% of the city's zone land that's zoned for housing is reserved for housing types that less than 30% of families can afford. While conversely, only about 1/3 or 36% of the city's land that's zoned for housing allows housing types that could be affordable to up to 60% of Missoulians. So a majority of the land zoned for housing within the city is limited to housing types that are unaffordable to most households in Missoula. One consequence of this zoning pattern is that the city's neighborhoods tend to be segregated along the lines of income and also of race and ethnicity. And this segregation then leads to other social equity issues because lower income families are excluded from living in neighborhoods that may offer economic opportunities and amenities that higher income families enjoy. So we analyzed income levels across the city in different neighborhoods to assess whether zoning may be contributing to this segregation. And this map shows the median household income in each neighborhood in Missoula. In areas in purple are lower income, and the areas in green are higher income. When you overlay the city's zoning with this map, becomes clear that zoning is playing a role in segregating neighborhoods by income. So in these 2 maps at the top of the screen, zones that allow for single dwelling houses are predominantly found in higher income neighborhoods. And then conversely, zones that allow for apartments and generally higher density housing are predominantly found in lower income neighborhoods. The zoning map may also be contributing to segregation by race or ethnicity. And so this map shows the percent of the population in each neighborhood that identifies as a person of color. Areas in purple are places that have lower population of people of color, and areas in orange have a higher share of the population that identifies as a person of color. And here again, the role of zoning in affecting housing choices and housing affordability is clear. Zones that only allow for single dwelling houses are far less diverse neighborhoods, while zones that allow for apartments and higher density housing are generally more diverse and include a higher share of persons of color. So segregation by income or race and ethnicity are important equity issues in their own right. However, they also have secondary impacts on other issues that have equity implications. So first, living in neighborhoods that have relatively high levels of poverty can limit the upward economic mobility for low-income families, and especially for children in those neighborhoods. It also means that these families are unable to choose to live in other neighborhoods that may offer a better quality of life or support better public health. So other neighborhoods in the city might be more walkable, have better access to healthy food, or are closer to parks and trails. But there are not housing options that are affordable to lower income families in those neighborhoods. So the city has developed a measure of the livability of certain neighborhoods called the Residential Suitability Index. And we can use this measure to try to understand how zoning may be contributing to people having options for choosing different kinds of neighborhoods to live in. So dark green areas on this map generally rank higher in having the amenities that contribute to livability and public health. And the good news is that many of the areas that rank highly in the suitability index are also zoned for a variety of housing types and for higher density housing. And so that means that there are housing options that are more likely to be affordable to families of lower incomes. Yet there are many neighborhoods in the city that could offer relatively high levels of livability and support public health, but they're only accessible to families who can afford a single dwelling house. Allowing for a wider variety of housing types in these areas could enable lower income families to experience some of the quality of life and public health benefits of living in these neighborhoods. That concludes this segment of the video on housing affordability, segregation, and exclusion. And now we want to hear from you about these issues. So consider these two questions. One, how have you or people you know been affected by the housing affordability crisis in Missoula? And how have you or people you know been affected by issues of segregation and exclusion? So please submit your comments in the box below this video.